I start with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments, commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Okay, so I want to welcome everyone in here to chapter 6. Now, I told you that we were going to be doing 2 chapters a week, but this kind of closes out a section of Isaiah, and then starting at chapter 7, it kind of does a different theme and a different. We kind of shift gears. So I wanted to go ahead and finish this off. Plus, there's just a ton of stuff to talk about in chapter 6. All right. So just again, want to welcome everyone here to this iteration of the study of the book of Isaiah. And tonight we're in chapter 6, and here's some dates that that I'll be referencing tonight, right here. 745 Tiglath-Pileser, the third of Assyria. Okay, and then you've got this date here, 739. That's when Isaiah begins his ministry. Actually, that should be down here. 740, King Uzziah of Judah dies. And right at that time, 739, 740, that whole right in there, it's kind of hard to pin down a date, but that's when Isaiah begins his ministry. I need to clean that up a little bit, but that's those are the dates that we're going to be talking about a little bit tonight. And so we need, before we can actually go into a lot of things, we need to understand the history of what is going on in Israel and in Judah right now at the time that Isaiah is writing and prophesying, preaching to his people. And so with a little bit of history, and I know that a lot of you are not history nuts, but that's okay. Just bear with me, okay? Because history nerds like to nerd. All right, so after Solomon's death in 930, the kingdom broke in two. You had Jeroboam took the northern 10 tribes, and then Rehoboam, Solomon's son, he was the king of Judah and of Simeon. And you'll look over here at the map. I just kind of wanted to show you what this looked like. This would have been 100 years before what we're talking about tonight. But just to kind of give you an idea, because we're going to talk about Benjamin here and Simeon here, because it'll kind of fit in with what we're talking about tonight. But okay, so there's the kingdom of Israel under Solomon. Okay, under David it was even bigger, but Solomon kind of backed down a little bit on some things, and this was pretty much the kingdom under Solomon. Okay, it went all the way up here to the Euphrates River. So anyway, we need to also pay attention whether we're talking about, it gets kind of confusing when we talk about either the kingdom of Israel or Judah. Sometimes we talk about Israel, sometimes we talk about Judah. What are we talking about? Are we talking about Israel as the whole of God's chosen people, or are we talking about the 10 tribes that they were together from 930 to 722 BCE, a couple of hundred years? And so sometimes you have to stop and think, okay, what are we talking about? The northern tribes or Israel as a whole? And in the Bible, it also does the same thing. It talks about one and the other, the house of Jacob, house of Ephraim, and they repeat themselves for emphasis. but it confuses some people, and some people have actually built doctrine on the practice that the Bible uses of repeating something only with different words. You're saying the same thing when they're talking about the house of Jacob, the house of Ephraim. Most of the time they're one and the same, but they've built a theology and a doctrine that says no, they're two separate entities altogether, and that one day they bring in the one stick or two sticks and one stick, and how that the northern tribes were all lost, but those of you that come to faith in the Messiah, then you must be part of the 10 lost tribes. Okay, that is two house theology, Hebrew roots theology. It's in error. So we won't go into too much of that tonight. But so here's a good picture. Here's, like I said, David's the United Kingdom under David and Saul was about, it was this. Okay, that's the largest that it ever was. And then after Solomon died, then what you have is it split off. They lost a lot of territory, and all of this stuff over here in here, this area. Well, that was all lost once the Solomon died and the kingdom kind of broke up. Even Philistia, and that kind of abated a little bit, but still, those are the kingdoms as they looked around. This one, especially this one right here, is the kingdom that similar to what it would have been under when Isaiah was doing his writing. Okay, so all right. So we said that Isaiah began his ministry about 200 years after Solomon, around 739, 740, when King Uzziah died. And so that was actually just 17 years before the fall of the Northern Kingdom. The Northern Kingdom was their capital was Samaria, and you see that right here. Okay. And when the Assyrians came down, they captured that. Well, then that was the end of the northern kingdoms. So the northern kingdom was by far the more prosperous of the two. The 10 tribes were much more prosperous than were the southern part, Judah and Simeon, and a little bit of Benjamin. And so you can see that by the relative size of their territories, that Israel was larger than Judah. And one of the key reasons for this disparity was the major trade routes that went from up Damascus and the Euphrates and all that area up there down through to Egypt, and the back and forth, the trade routes. And I think I've got a picture. Yeah, here's a major trade routes that I've got. Okay, you've got this one here, and that was the one that was called the King's Highway. Now, that's the one that went through Petra, if you've ever been to Petra and seen that. And so this whole area, I mean, if you, it's kind of like in this country when the railroads were put in. If you had a town on the railroad, then it was more likely to prosper than the town that got bypassed, or they went around your town, and the railroad didn't stop there. So you had this highway here, which is not in Israel, okay, or Judah. It's not in Judah because it's on the east side of the Jordan River. But then you had two routes here. There's one from Damascus, and it went over here to Hatzor, and then down to Dor, and on down into Egypt. And that one, I think that one was called the Via Maris, which was the ocean route of the way, the road by the sea. And so that was a major thoroughfare for trade. There was only one problem for Judah. It didn't go through Judah. If you'll look back over here, that thing went down through, it went down through here and then right over toward Ashdod and Ashkelon and on down right by the sea. Why? Because the territory was easier to travel. It was flatter there, a coastal plain. And the area, through Judah, it's just all mountains and things like that. So the routes were going to take any kind of trade route in those days would take the easiest, simplest route. And so that's why with that trade route, then Judah was kind of left out. Israel then could benefit from both taxes and duties, as well as commercial opportunities, where when these trains were these camel trains, I guess you'd call them. I don't know. When they would come through, then there would be an opportunity for buying and selling and so forth. So the land up around in Israel, in northern area, they had the plain of Jezreel, which that's part of the Armageddon, the valley of Megiddo, where Armageddon is going to be. Well, that's very good agricultural land. It was 3,000 years ago, just as it is today. And Judah was really only good for, they could grow grapes down around Hebron, and that area there was known for its grapes. And there was some grazing, with sheep and so forth. But really, they didn't have a great, they didn't have as good of agricultural bounty that Israel did. Israel had a much greater army than did Judah. They had much more of a military might, and they fought against each other once in a while during the time that they were split off. But in just about every measurable way, Judah was actually the weaker sister. And but guess what? It was Israel was the first one to fall. Now, why was that? Well, biblically, Israel was portrayed as an apostate nation right from its inception. When they split off, it began right then. If you look at what Jeroboam did, he built these golden statues of bulls, and he put one, and then he offered sacrifices that right here at Bethel, right here, a holy place. I mean, that's where Jacob, had his vision of the ladder, and Abraham sacrificed things there, and it just a very holy place, very significant place. And then the other one was up here in right around here in the city of Dan. Now, up there in the city of Dan today, they have the temple that was built by Jeroboam. It is all that's left of it is the foundation, the slab of it, and the steps going down to where the altar was. Then they have a mock-up of an altar that basically they just made a metal frame so that people could get an idea of how large the altar would have been. But you can still see the foundation of the altar there. But that's where they had a major part of their religion for Israel. The reason for that is that Jeroboam did not want the people to come back to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the feast, because he figured that if they did that, then they would rebel, and then they would, go back to supporting Jerusalem rather than him. So the Bible states that Israel, the northern 10 tribes, did not have one single good king in the 200 years from 930 when Solomon died to 722 when Samaria fell. During that just over 200 years, they never had a good king. And you can name off some of them. Some of the most notorious, of course, was Ahaz and his evil sidekick Jezebel. Then you had Manasseh, which was the worst king that you could ever imagine. And so Judah really didn't do that much better. They had arguably 5 good kings during the 350 years from 930 until they fell in 586. There were a couple of kings who were only kind of like meh, marginally good, but Judah did have enough good leadership that it kind of brought them back periodically from the brink of idolatry, and it kind of staved off their eventual destruction, because they would start following God during these good kings, and so any judgment was delayed until then they fell off the wagon and went right back into idolatry. So now in 745, the Assyrians are back on the road again to conquering. They had been quiet about 50 years. Maybe it was because Jonah went to Nineveh, and when he went up there to Nineveh and he preached, and the Assyrians in Nineveh got religion, well, then they quieted down for a while. So it had been about 50 years since the Assyrians had gone on the warpath. And the Isaiah's ministry begins right at the last years, like 17 years, the last 17 years of Israel. And during this time, you have another Jeroboam. Jeroboam the second was the king of Israel, and Uzziah was the king of Judah. Now, both kings had very long reigns in terms of how long kings reigned back in those days. And Jeroboam the second's reign was 46 or 47 years, and Uzziah reigned 52 years. Now, this was basically the golden age of these two countries, because they were at peace. They didn't have any major confrontations other than border wars between themselves, but they were relatively at peace, and everything was wonderful, supposedly, except for there were a couple of prophets, these guys up there in Israel, a couple of guys, one of them named Joel and the other one named Hosea, and they were prophesying that Israel would not exist in 50 years. And so they were not very popular. You can imagine if we had some guy that was prophesying that the United States is not going to be here in 50 years. Okay? So I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet. I'm just saying, if somebody did prophesy that, he wouldn't be a very popular person. So in 745, then finally, the Assyrians go on the warpath. They decide that they're going to go down and they're going to conquer Egypt. And there's a long history, of what will happen there between the Assyrians and the Egyptians and so forth. But that's what they're making their foray into Egypt. And how do they have to get there? The roads through Israel. And so this is the world that Isaiah finds himself when he gets into his ministry. So with that little bit of history lesson there, anybody got any comments or questions before we go into the scriptures? Okay, now getting started on verse 1, it said, "In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw Adonai sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple." So he's seeing the Lord in the temple. He said he was sitting on the throne, and it was in the temple. And so, at that point, that God had not set himself up in the temple, and so he was there in the Holy of Holies, but it was not a place of reigning as such. And so this is the only specific vision that Isaiah recorded that he had, with a date and a really specific time. And although he described the entire book as a vision and a vision of things that he had seen. So why did Isaiah date the passage? He didn't date most of the other ones. He just talked about them. Probably did so because King Uzziah had been the best king of Judah since Solomon, and 52 years that he reigned. And so it's kind of like, if we look at how long is 52 years, we'll look at how long Queen Elizabeth reigned. I mean, she reigned even longer than that, but it was it's, for some people, that's all they had ever known. Even with Uzziah, he was a good king in relative terms. He was a good administrator, a good statistician, good with statistics, not statistics, with strategy, good military guy. All right. And so they had life was good under King Uzziah. So during the last part of his reign, it kind of got to his head, and he decided, well, I'm a king. I'm going to go into the temple and I'm going to offer a sacrifice right there on the altar. I don't need these priests to do it for me because I'm the king. And the whole time the priests are coming in there and telling him, hey, no, king, you can't do this. This is not going to work out very well for you. So he did it anyway because he was the king, and he had been the king for many, many years. And so he did that. And what happened? He was struck by God with leprosy. Well, of course, then that makes him kind of not available to be the king, out there in front of people and kissing babies and all that kind of stuff. So his son Jotham had to he was the puppet king, but Uzziah was still pulling all the strings. So really and truly, it didn't cause that much of a problem for the people of Israel. Now, that idea of he was struck down with leprosy because of his pride, and in that respect, his life was kind of a foreshadowing of the history of Judah. And we know that King Uzziah died about 740, reigned 52 years. And when he died, most of the people in Israel or in Judah would have felt a great loss. That's all they had ever known. And so who would lead them next? His son had been, the puppet king. And could he then follow in his father's footsteps and do what he needed to do for Judah and lead them properly? And so we see that Assyria now was a growing power, a growing threat, and they had ambitions of conquest. So that threat of foreign invasion was very real. Judah, at this point, needed a strong king. So, as it turned out, Judah kind of even shrunk a little bit when Uzziah died, and she never did rise back to it. And so at that time, Isaiah received his vision of Israel's true king, which is Adonai, and he was more than adequate to provide for his people, but this unusual vision prepared the prophet to act and speak for God. And so even though God is invisible because he's a spirit, and because he's a spirit, we worship him in spirit and truth. He's manifested himself at various times so that people can appreciate certain aspects of his personality. And so another couple of things that pop up is that the early church father, Jerome, observed that in connection with this passage of Uzziah dying, that the year of Uzziah's death was the year that Romulus, one of the founders of Rome, was born. And it was only a short time after the death of Uzziah, and it was actually in 754 BC, that according to one of the historiographers named Varro, that Rome was founded. Okay, so the national glory of Israel died out with King Uzziah, and really it hasn't been revived to this day. Israel, of course, is a nation, but I don't know that we would call them a major nation and a world power. They have power in their own theater there, but as far as a world power, I'm not sure we could do that. So Isaiah described Adonai as sovereign Lord, the overlord of all the earth. He was exalted. He's up on this throne, and he's sitting in his royal attire. And so I think it's kind of interesting that his reign, we've talked about his reign, Uzziah's reign, it just overshadowed everything in Israel, in Judah, because people looked at Uzziah. He was taking care of business, and so when he died, that left a vacuum there, terrible vacuum, and people didn't know what to do. And I think Isaiah was kind of caught up into this also, in that it says that in the year that King Uzziah died, if you look at the King James Version, it said that in the year that Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord. Okay, so Uzziah was up there, and then when he died, whoa, you mean the Lord is back, is up there? We couldn't see him because Uzziah was in the way. And so and I think a lot of people fell into that category, that Uzziah was such a strong personality and was so successful that they didn't really have a need for God that much. And so, but for Isaiah, when Uzziah died, then Isaiah saw the Lord. Said he was high and lifted up. And then it says his train filled the temple. And one writer said, well, that word train could also be translated the hem of his robe. In fact, I think the translation that we used for this tonight was that, it says, and the train of his robe. And, I don't know. Normally when I think of a train, I think of, the long skirt that comes off of the, from a bride's dress. I don't know why they call it a train, other than it comes back behind her caboose or something. I don't know. But, that's what I think of as a train is coming off of a bride's dress, a long, long bunch of material that follows him. Well, this John Oswald had said that it could also be translated as a hem. And so it says, just the hem of his robe filled the temple. And so the temple was 75 feet tall. And it said just the hem, the little small part of his robe filled the temple. So really, wow, how big is God at that point? Of course, we know that he's limitless, but I think you get the idea that here Isaiah's looking at it, and he just didn't have words to describe how glorious all of this was to see the Lord and lift it up and so forth. So it was, words kind of failed him. He couldn't really come up with a good description in so few words, but I think it's still pretty good when you can say, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and his train, just the smallest part of his robe down there, filled the temple. So going on to verse 2, above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. So so what we see there with 2, twain is 2. Okay. So they had two of the wings covered their face, and 2 of the wings covered their feet or their lower body, and 2 of them they used for actual flying. So now the word seraphim generally in the Bible was translated as serpents, or maybe serpentine or something like that, where the author of the John Oswald here that we use, it says that these are more like fiery angels, and how that they, maybe the way that they twirled, or the flames around them or something, and that's what the seraphim here should probably be the burning ones. And so this is the only reference to a seraphim as an angelic being that you find in Scripture. Like I said, normally in Hebrew, seraphim is a snake. And when John the Revelator talked about seeing things like that, he may have been looking at dragon-like creatures too, and who covered their faces. And so why would they have done that? Because of the brilliance of being in the throne room with God. They were covering their faces to block out the radiance of God's glory. And then also they would cover their feet. Well, in some parts of Hebrew, when the ancient Middle Eastern languages of the day, to cover one's feet also meant to cover the lower part of your body, your genitalia and so forth, so that these things, that it was for modesty. They were covering themselves in the presence of the Lord. So and there's a picture that you can see of, somebody had an idea of what the seraphim may have looked like, and we don't know. We don't know. All right, so there you go. Warren got the Hebrew word for seraph, means to burn, and so that's why we could call these things fiery beings, I guess. All right, going ahead. Isaiah 6, 3-4, and one cried unto another, and it said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. All right, so I think these seraphim, their joy at being in God's presence here, it was evident. They were calling out to each other, "Holy, holy, holy!" Just in this kind of supreme joy at God's holiness, and the triple, the repetition of it 3 times there indicated that God's holiness was above all else, and nothing else in the world would be that holy. And so I think nowhere that I know of in the Old Testament is there another threefold repetition of God's holiness. There is in Revelation now, in the New Testament, in Revelation 4:8, and other times there are in the Bible that they repeat things 3 times for emphasis, but it's not it's not uncommon for that. But this is the only one for holiness. This holiness is a distinctiveness that a distinctiveness from everything that's not divine. And so, especially if you're in reference to ethical behavior, God is totally above all of unethical behavior and is separated from that. So, so Isaiah saw God as absolutely upright, correct, and true. His glory was not restricted to the throne room or to heaven, but it said it filled the whole earth. So God's glory fills up the earth, and that's one of his attributes. He just fills up everything with his glory. All right, so and it says that the power of their song that they were singing back and forth, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts," the power of that shook the doorposts of the temple. These doorposts are 75 feet tall. So very, very powerful words. And it said there was smoke filled the air. And so some say, well, that would be smoke from the incense altar, and others say, well, it could be smoke from the regular altar. But if they were inside the temple itself, it more likely it could be smoke from the incense altar. Okay, so comments or questions? Jump in there if you got a comment or question. Okay, then I said, "Oi to me, for I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I am dwelling among a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, Adonai Zvaot." All right, so Isaiah feared that he would be consumed, just burned up with this. You get to see something like that with all of this fire and everything. He was in the presence of the purest of all beings. And so, he's just kind of pronouncing, I don't know, judgment or just woe, on himself. It's just, oh no, what's going to happen now? And so these are the first words that Isaiah himself spoke in this book, and they announced that he talked about things, but this is the first things that were in quotations from himself. And he had he first had to become aware of his own sin, and then the uncleanliness before he could worship God as he should. And not only did he have an unclean lips, but he dwelt among a people whose lips were very unclean and therefore unfit to praise or speak for God. And so, like King Uzziah died as an unclean leper. And so why the unclean lips? Okay, unclean lips is evidence of an unclean heart. That what did Yeshua said, that out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. And so if somebody is if they're kind of a vile person in many ways, or let's just say they were not the cleanest and everything, you're gonna the language that they use is going to be indicative of the condition of their heart. And those of you that have been, say, outside someplace other than synagogue or a church, and you work in the real world, you every once in a while you will run across people that are very colorful in their language. And so it's not always an indicator that they're a bad person, but they sure could use some cleaning up. And so whereas God was holy, Isaiah and the Jews were unclean, not upright, impure in their ethical conduct. Isaiah sensed his danger because he saw the real king of Israel, who was Adonai Svaot, the Lord of hosts. And it's seeing God for who he is that, sometimes we can see who we are and understand and appreciate, or maybe be afraid of, the difference between what God is and who we are. So, but he brought the people of Israel and Judah in also because, that's who he was being called to. And he felt an empathy for all those people. And so that's why he said, I am a man of unclean lips, and I'm among people of unclean lips. So then one of the seraphim flew to me with a glowing coal in his hand, and which he had taken with tongs from the altar. So Isaiah acknowledged his hopeless condition. He did not plead with God or make any vows or promises or anything, but he just said, I'm an unclean man. I got unclean lips. So God went into action right there. The confession must precede cleansing. And so the altar that the seraph took the coal from, I believe, was the brazen altar, and could have been maybe the brazen altar from heaven, because there's we're just a mirror of what's going on in heaven. And taking the coal, wherever he took the coal from, it was hot. And so how hot was it? It says that these beings took and used, they took the coals with tongs. Well, why did they need tongs if they were already fiery beings? Well, they took it because the coals were set apart and they were holy. But they took the coals, and from the heat of that, and it purified Isaiah's lips. And again, we're talking about metaphorically speaking here. I'm sure that God didn't take a real hot coal and have it put on Isaiah's lips. Literally, it was a figurative thing that was going to cleanse him. So that coal then is what connects the man with the sacrifice. And so when a man would offer a sacrifice, he puts it on the priest puts it on the altar. The coals then are what burns it all up and sends the sweet savor to the Lord. It's called an olah, which and makes the smoke go up to the Lord. So ultimately, all sin is forgiven by a sacrifice, and so, and of course, Yeshua being the ultimate sacrifice. And so that cleansed Isaiah. Any comments or questions? You're reading the, make sure you pull the chat up and read the chat as it comes up. All right. So Isaiah said, then I heard says, he touched my mouth with it and said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away and your sins atoned for. So God's purging agent touched Isaiah's mouth, and this angelic messenger, the seraphim, assured the prophet that he had been completely cleansed of his uncleanliness. And so some people have called this Isaiah's conversion experience. I don't know that I can go with that, but because what did he convert from? He was already seemingly a holy person, but he considered himself unworthy, is what I think you can see. But I think we could probably think of this as Isaiah's, instead of a conversion, more of a consecration, kind of like with the Apostle Paul. You know, Christians like to say Paul was converted. I would say converted to what? But Paul never became a Christian. He was always a Jew's Jew. It's just that he was a Jew that believed that this other Jew named Yeshua was the Son of God. So, you know, it's just one of those funny things. And I hear pastors say it all the time, where when Paul got converted, or when Saul got converted and he changed his name to Paul. No, he never changed his name to Paul. His name was always Saul in the Hebraics and in Judaic circles, and Paul when he was in secular or Roman and Hellenistic circles. All right, that's another lesson for another day. So then I heard the voice of Adonai saying, whom should I send, and who will go for us? So I said, Hineni, send me. So God, he asked for a volunteer to serve him, you know. So evidently, you know, he was asking from whoever was there in the throne room, the seraphim and Isaiah, and God. And so anyway, he just kind of asked the question, and of course it's directed toward Isaiah. And so Isaiah said, I'm here, I'll go. And he was so overwhelmed by all of this stuff that was really the only answer that he could come up with. I mean, that it was an obvious answer, and that he was going to follow the Lord. Okay. This section that we just finished here is a major revelation of the grace of God and the condition for spiritual cleansing. Confession is paramount, and so it's one of the premier consecration passages in the Old Testament. And so God's grace on this occasion, his grace to Isaiah, so impacted his ministry that, I mean, his ministry bore this hallmark all throughout the book, and we'll see that later on as we study more in this.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what did you say about spiritual confession and cleansing? I couldn't type as fast what you were saying.
Oh, well, I just said that this section right here indicated that confession of our sin is paramount to forgiveness. You know, if you don't confess that you're a sinner, then how could you be forgiven of your sins? It's kind of like an alcoholic that won't confess that he's an alcoholic. How's he going to be cured if he will not come to grips with the fact that he's an alcoholic?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. Let's go ahead, because we are running out of time. Then he said, go, tell this people, hear without understanding and see without perceiving. Okay, that's a tough one. All right, that is a very tough verse there. And a lot of times these preachers, they'll talk about Isaiah 1 through 8 there, but they stop right there at 8 because they get to 9 and they don't want to deal with it because it's too hard. So what we're going to deal with it a little bit tonight. So God proceeded to give Isaiah specific instructions about what he wanted him to do, and then what the prophet could expect regarding his ministry, his historic and political situation, and his nation's survival. So all of those things, God tells us, okay, this is what to expect in your ministry, in the historic political realm, and also in the survival of Judah and Israel at this point, because maybe Israel had not fallen at that point. So the Lord sent Isaiah back to the people that he lived among, and this people of unclean lips, and he was to tell them to listen and to look at the revelations that he brought from God, but they would not fully understand it, and they didn't know what the prophet was talking about. So does God really want to prevent people from understanding and repenting and being healed? So this verse and the next one are, I think they're more ironic. Okay, there's an irony there, and so maybe we should paraphrase this message to the Israelites as saying, okay, I'm going to tell Isaiah what to do. This is what you do it. Yeah, go ahead and just be stubborn if you want to. Just go ahead and do it.
Rabbi,
so, yeah.
Actually, the wording in verse 9 is very interesting because it says Shim'u Shamoa means God uses an emphasis. He uses the same verb twice. Shim'u Shamoa, and here it's a command, but it's emphatic that you're going to hear. You definitely are going to hear. However, they all tavinu, but you're not going to understand. And then it says ra'u ra'o. You see, and you're definitely, it's an emphatic again. You are going to see. Vayal teda'u, but you're not going to get it. You just
Not going to comprehend.
It's not going to. But the fact that it's emphasizing that, saying this is God saying, look, this is definitely going to happen. There's no averting this, because these first few chapters are it's a judgment upon Judah, saying, listen, this is what's going to happen. I'm bringing judgment upon you. So this is all part of it. It's like, okay, it's like God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Well, you know what? Pharaoh's never really a nice guy to begin with. God just completed what was actually going on. And so what was happening here is that just like Paul would give sinners over to their sin, that they might be saved in the end, that's kind of like what's happening here. God's doing this on a national level. Says, listen, this is tough love.
Oh yeah, it is. That's good. And I think if we go ahead, it says, make the heart of his people fat, the ears heavy, and their eyes blind, else they would see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and return and be healed. Well, the effect of Isaiah's preaching would not be that the people would repent, but that they would harden their hearts against his message. Okay, that happens quite frequently in the Bible. The Apostle John quoted this verse, and in reference to the Jews' inability in Yeshua's day to believe in him. And he also added, he said, these things Isaiah said because he saw his glory and he spoke about him. So Isaiah may or may not have realized that his words had prophetic significance, in addition to being applicable to his own situation. Now, what I think these verses, if you can kind of take them, if Isaiah had come in and given the people a modern American sermon where you deserve a break today, that sort of thing, and you deserve God's blessings, and God's going to just bless you, and because you're His child, and He's going to just do all sorts of good things for you, just kind of follow along, and kind of a soft gospel. If he'd given them a soft message, a soft gospel, the kind where everybody kind of wants to hear it, that builds them up a little bit, every week they get the same kind of fluff. And is that going to change them? They may go through the acts of repentance, but in the reality, they really never get into real deep repentance that causes them to change their behavior. But he could have done that, and it kind of strung them along a little bit, but that's not what God told him to do. He said, no, you teach the truth, and they're not going to like it a bit. You go out there and you do what you have to do. Always preach the truth, preach the word. And any of you that are in a ministry situation, I know some of you are, and I would admonish you to always preach the word, regardless of whether it hurts somebody's feelings or not, because in the end result is you might just very well be saving their soul. And so I think in these passages, it is something that Isaiah is telling, and it did not save that generation of Judah or Israel, but how many future generations have been changed by the words that Isaiah spoke over these next 66, the next 60 chapters. He may not have been able to turn people right then and there, but he was able to change lives in the future. So he was not real happy with this, I'm sure. But then he says, Adonai, how long? And I think this was a genuine, he was concerned. He said, how long do I preach this? And God told him, he says, until your cities are laid waste and without inhabitant, houses are without people, and the land is utterly desolate. Adonai will drive people far away. The desertion of their land will be vast. What he's saying is, you keep preaching until the judgment is completed. It has to be totally done for, and because there can be no room for backtracking, no room for coming back and just soft pedaling and backpedaling and so forth. It has to be completely cleaned up. It's like with if you have an infection and they give you antibiotics, they'll give you 10 days worth of antibiotics, and it says, okay, once you start feeling better in 2 or 3 days, they said, keep taking the antibiotic because you're not cured yet. If you drop off the antibiotic after 2 or 3 days, when you start feeling better again, then that sickness is going to come back out and with a vengeance and put a hurting on you. And so that's what God has said. We're going to keep preaching that word, that antibiotic word, until they're cleansed. Everybody is cleansed. And okay, they may have to the land has to be cleared. The land is going to get its rest. The people are going to be wiped out, except let's go then to the last verse. But yet it shall be a tenth, and it shall return and shall be eaten as a teal tree. Okay, a terebinth. Okay, this looks like a I think this is King James version, but it says, though a tenth was still be in it, it shall be burned as a terebinth tree, or as an oak whose stump remains when cut down. So the holy seed will be the stump. All right, from this stump that has been cut down, there will be a nation, because there says 10% of the population is going to survive all of this. And that's God's tithe. Okay, 10% of the people, that's his tithe. That's what he's gathered. And but the land is going to face judgment. This 10th portion possibly refers to the remnant that was left in the land when Nebuchadnezzar took the majority of it captive. I'm not real sure I can go totally with that, but because people, there were people, good people, went into the into captivity, and then they came back stronger than before. Ezra, Nehemiah, and some of these Zerubbabel, and they came back. And because of their the things that they did in captivity and the reforms that they came up with for Judaism, Judah never ever again slipped into idolatry. Never again. It was never a problem for them after that. They had other problems, but they rose from the ashes. They rose out of that stump. And if you've ever, I've seen where I've had trees, fruit trees that will freeze back, and so we have to chop them down. Well, then guess what? It's not very long until you're seeing a shoot come up out of that old dead stump, and so it'll grow again. And that's what God is saying here. There's still hope that this new stump is going to come up, and these people will rebuild Israel. And there will always be a remnant, a holy seed there, because God's not going to wipe out his people.
That's all, folks.